Comment on future plans.
Type Google into Google's search engine, then hit the News tab. You might find a few stories that the tech giant would rather you didn't see. A few weeks back, we learned that Google was working on something called Project Dragonfly, a new search engine for the Chinese market, one that would function in compliance with Beijing's strict rules on censorship. In an organization that talks up transparency, it is ironic that only a handful of the company's 88,000 employees knew about this project. When some of them caught wind of it, they leaked the details to an online news site, the Intercept, which broke the story and put Google's top brass on the spot. Google has ventured into China before, in 2010, but back then it decided it could not live with the censorship rules there, so it pulled out. This potential re-entry into China signals a major policy U-turn involving one of the biggest tech companies on the planet and the world's largest market. Our starting point this week is Google's headquarters, Silicon Valley, USA. Times change, technology moves on, companies evolve. There was a time when Google's corporate mantra was "don't be evil." That altruistic philosophy has since been amended, watered down, if you will, to "do the right thing." Was that a mere shift in semantics? Or has Google made a moral adjustment in the way it does business, with China just being the latest, most newsworthy example of that?
Google is celebrating its 20th birthday. In that time, we have folded it into our lives in some really deep ways. Google is by far the dominant search service on mobile devices and on computers in the world. It's very interesting when we look at how Google deals with China, because that is one place where it won't be dominant and one place where it really has to pander to the demands of the government there. But I think it's something Google has to do. Google can't ignore China. To ignore China is to ignore the world.
In China, increasingly nowadays, doing the right thing is about trading off two lesser evils. When I speak to Chinese friends, actually many of them are hopeful that they can use Google in China because they would like that to be an alternative to the near-monopolist, which is Baidu. It would be a really interesting scene if there were two big search engines in China, duking it out rather than one big search engine in China.
Google has had a foothold in China before, operating there from 2006 to 2010, often coming into conflict with government censors. Then, after getting cyber-attacked and discovering that the Gmail accounts of Chinese human rights activists had been hacked, it reevaluated its policy. A company whose stated mission is to organize the world's information effectively pulled the plug on itself in China, walking away from the world's biggest internet market. 8 years later, Google wants back in. And it knows that President Xi Jinping's government will only permit that if Google builds in search filters that meet the censorship rules, so that if anyone in China enters a term like human rights, democracy, or political opposition, Google's search engine would come up blank.
So it's like a 180-degree reversal on what they said in 2010. And so it's quite a stunning turnaround that they would suddenly change, because in China nothing is changed. In fact, it's probably got worse in terms of the censorship. The laws that are in place that oversee these things have become a lot more draconian in that 8-year period. So for Google to say it's going to go back in, it's an extraordinary story, and that's why it's had a lot of attention internationally.
The legitimate concern that people have that if Google goes into China, that it's legitimizing China's censorship regime. That's up to people's interpretation of what a role of a corporation ought to be. Google is out to make money. And so given that there are many shareholders that want to see Google's stock price go up, clearly it's in their very right to pursue one of the largest markets in the world.
This story only became public because someone inside Google wanted it that way and leaked the details of Project Dragonfly to The Intercept, an online news site. It's since been extensively reported elsewhere, but Google is not commenting publicly. It's not the first time this year the company has dealt with internal dissent on a large scale. 3 months ago, thousands of employees signed a petition protesting against something called Project Maven, work that Google was doing to help the US military analyze drone footage. Google later announced it would not renew its contract with the Pentagon. First Maven, now Dragonfly. Google, which deals in information, is finding that it cannot keep its own corporate secrets contained.
The company has 88,000 employees, so less than 0.35% or something like that of the overall workforce actually knew about this. And once we've reported it, of course, the rest of the employees then found out. And a lot of them were very angry, not just because of the censorship issue, which is controversial on its own, but because it was kept secret from them. A huge issue inside Google is the secrecy.
It's a really interesting moment in Silicon Valley because when companies like Google admit that they are pursuing controversial projects like building a search engine in China, or when companies like Microsoft reveal that they've been working with the Department of Homeland Security on projects that might involve, the separation of families, the labor force in Silicon Valley rise up in protest and demand better behavior from their companies. So we've seen it quite vocally at Microsoft. We've heard rumblings of it at Facebook, and now we're starting to see it at Google.
They should have accountability, but because they can hide behind the corporate veil, there are different sets of rules and norms that are expected of corporations. If citizens are concerned about corporations becoming too powerful and becoming like nation states, then they should actually be asking the lawmakers to pass laws that require certain corporations above a certain revenue line to have a different way of responding to public inquiries.
Should Google succeed in getting back into China, it stands to gain access to more than 750 million people online. But the company's competition there is way out front. In Google's 8-year absence, Baidu, a Chinese search engine, has solidified its position and now has more than 75% of that market. And old habits, even relating to relatively young technology, die hard. So even if Google manages to clear the political hurdles currently standing in its way, it will have a lot of catching up to do.
Everyone at Google knows that if this is successful, it will be both politically controversial and a long, slow process to try to build back reputation in China. Web users in China have established their habits long ago, and their habits do not include Google at this point. So I see this as an effort to establish at least a small presence in China in the hopes that it might grow over time. Look, we have to realize that it's almost malpractice for a business that has global ambitions to ignore the largest market in the world.
You can see many tech companies knocking at the door of China's huge revenues, but this does not mean that China wants it. Under President Xi Jinping, internet censorship has gotten even tighter. So any kind of censorship deal that Google can strike with the government now would be much worse than back in 2010. And this is the real bind that operating in China puts on such companies. How much can you criticize a government whose permission you need to operate in their market?